British tank armor in World War II reflected a nation fighting under constant pressure, forced to adapt its armored doctrine while already engaged in combat. Infantry tanks such as the Matilda II featured armor that was exceptionally thick for the early war period, while cruiser tanks sacrificed protection to achieve operational mobility. Its thick, well-constructed armor rendered it largely immune to standard anti-tank weapons during the North African campaign. These changes reflected lessons learned through hard experience rather than theoretical planning. British armor evolved in contact with the enemy, shaped by necessity rather than ideal conditions. The Valentine tank represented an attempt to balance protection, reliability, and production efficiency. Its armor was respectable for its size, and its construction was robust. While not fast or heavily armed, the Valentine proved reliable and survivable, serving in multiple theaters throughout the war. Its armor was not exceptional, but it was dependable, a quality that became increasingly valuable as the conflict intensified. As the war progressed, British armor philosophy began to converge toward a more balanced approach. The Cromwell tank exemplified this transition. It featured improved armor protection while maintaining high mobility. While still not as heavily armored as German heavy tanks, the Cromwell represented a recognition that speed and armor needed to coexist rather than compete. This shift marked a critical evolution in British tank design. British heavy armor reached its most distinctive expression in the Churchill tank. Designed with thick armor and exceptional climbing ability, the Churchill was intended for difficult terrain and infantry support. Its armor was among the thickest used by British forces, offering strong protection against enemy fire in many situations. Early confidence in thick infantry tanks gave way to a more nuanced understanding of protection, mobility, and combined arms warfare. Armor was no longer viewed as an isolated solution, but as one element within a broader tactical system. By the middle of the war, British armor had evolved significantly from its early forms. While still facing challenges against heavily armored German tanks, British designs were more balanced, reliable, and better integrated into Allied operations. Armor that once dominated through thickness alone now contributed through consistency and survivability. British tank armor in World War II was therefore defined not by a single breakthrough but by steady adaptation under pressure. It reflected a nation forced to fight while learning, adjusting designs in real time as battlefield realities shifted. This process of evolution, rather than any single specification, explains both the strengths and limitations of British armor during the conflict. As the war intensified, British tank armor faced a rapidly changing battlefield. German anti-tank technology advanced quickly, forcing British designers and commanders to confront the limitations of earlier armor concepts. What had once been sufficient protection now required constant revision, reinforcement, and tactical adjustment. British armor development during this phase was defined less by innovation and more by adaptation under fire. One of the most critical challenges was the increasing lethality of German anti-tank guns. Weapons such as the 50mm and later the 75mm anti-tank guns could penetrate armor that had previously been considered adequate. British tanks, especially cruiser types with thinner armor, became increasingly vulnerable. This forced British forces to rely more heavily on tactical coordination, terrain usage, and combined arms rather than armor alone. British engineers responded by reinforcing armor where possible and refining construction methods. Welding became more common, reducing the dangerous spalling effect caused by riveted armor when struck by enemy shells. While these improvements did not dramatically increase armor thickness, they significantly enhanced crew survivability. British armor design increasingly prioritized internal safety alongside external protection. The issue of sloped armor remained a persistent disadvantage. As a result, British armor philosophy leaned toward incremental improvement rather than revolutionary change. While not immune to high-velocity anti-tank guns, the Churchill's armor often allowed it to absorb hits that would have destroyed lighter vehicles. British forces also began to incorporate applique armor and field modifications. Additional plates were added to vulnerable areas, reflecting a pragmatic approach to armor enhancement. These modifications were rarely elegant, but they were effective. British armor thus became increasingly customized to specific theaters and operational needs. In Normandy and Western Europe, British tank armor faced a new set of challenges. Close terrain, hedgerows, and fortified positions exposed tanks to short-range anti-tank weapons and ambushes. Armor thickness alone could not guarantee survival. British crews relied heavily on infantry cooperation, artillery support, and tactical discipline to mitigate armor vulnerabilities. The psychological impact of armor performance should not be underestimated. British tank crews developed a realistic understanding of their vehicle's strengths and limitations. Unlike earlier phases of the war where confidence in armor could be misplaced, later British crews approached combat with caution and professionalism. Armor was seen as protection, not invincibility. British tank armor also benefited indirectly from Allied air superiority. Reduced exposure to enemy aircraft and improved intelligence allowed British armored units to operate with greater awareness of threats. This strategic context enhanced the effectiveness of existing armor without requiring drastic physical changes to tank design. By the later stages of the war, British armor doctrine had matured significantly. Tanks were no longer expected to operate independently or rely solely on their own protection. Instead, armor was integrated into a broader system of support, coordination, and firepower. This shift compensated for technical limitations and maximized battlefield effectiveness. Comparisons with American and Soviet designs highlight the unique British approach. American tanks prioritized standardization and ease of production, while Soviet tanks emphasized sloped armor and simplicity. British armor occupied a middle ground, combining respectable protection with adaptability and specialized roles. This diversity reflected Britain's strategic needs and industrial constraints. British heavy armor never reached the extreme thickness of German Tiger tanks, but it was also not burdened by the same logistical challenges. British tanks could be produced, transported, and maintained more efficiently, allowing armor to be deployed where it was needed most. This logistical advantage often mattered more than marginal differences in armor thickness. The survivability of British tank crews improved steadily as armor construction and tactical employment evolved. Even when tanks were lost, crews increasingly survived engagements, preserving experience and morale. This human factor was a crucial but often overlooked aspect of armor effectiveness. British armor design also benefited from close cooperation with Allied engineers and intelligence services. Battlefield reports, captured enemy equipment, and shared technical data informed ongoing improvements. British designers did not work in isolation. They were part of a broader Allied effort to refine armored warfare. By the end of the war, British tank armor had become a product of cumulative learning rather than initial doctrine. Early assumptions about infantry support and cruiser speed had been reshaped by years of combat experience. Armor was now designed with a clear understanding of enemy capabilities and operational realities. British tank armor in World War II should therefore be viewed as an evolutionary process. It did not dominate the battlefield through sheer technological superiority, but it adapted, endured, and contributed decisively to Allied victory. Its effectiveness lay not in perfection, but in resilience and integration. This legacy influenced post-war British armored design, shaping future vehicles and doctrines. The lessons learned about armor thickness, construction methods, and tactical employment carried forward into the Cold War era. British tank armor emerged from the war fundamentally transformed, forged by necessity and refined through experience. Ultimately, British tank armor during World War II represented a balance between what was ideal and what was possible. It reflected a nation fighting under constant pressure, making pragmatic choices in the face of evolving threats. This balance, rather than any single technical feature, defined its role and significance in the conflict. When British tank armor is evaluated in direct combat against German armored forces, the true measure of its effectiveness becomes clear. Instead, it functioned as part of a broader system that relied on coordination, adaptability, and cumulative pressure. Against German medium tanks, such as the Panzer III and Panzer IV, British armor performed adequately when employed correctly. British armor no longer enjoyed near invulnerability, forcing a shift toward tactical solutions rather than material superiority. This disparity made it clear that British tanks were not intended to engage German heavy armor head-on without support. Instead, British doctrine emphasized maneuver, flanking, and combined arms. Armor was expected to survive long enough to reposition, coordinate with artillery, or allow infantry and air power to neutralize enemy threats. This realism reduced unnecessary losses and improved operational efficiency over time. The integration of British armor into Allied operations amplified its effectiveness. British armor also benefited from lessons learned across multiple theaters. From a survivability perspective, British armor achieved meaningful success by the later stages of the war. Post-war assessments of British tank armor often underestimate its contribution due to a focus on raw specifications. It supported infantry, enabled advances, and absorbed enemy fire within a coordinated system. Its success lay in reliability rather than dominance. The legacy of British tank armor in World War II is therefore one of adaptation and endurance. In hindsight, British tank armor represented a pragmatic response to an unpredictable conflict. While never the most heavily armored or technologically advanced, British tanks remained relevant throughout the war by adapting to changing conditions. It reflected a nation fighting across multiple fronts, learning under fire, and refining its tools as the conflict unfolded. It was neither a failure nor a triumph in isolation, but a functional, evolving element of Allied victory.